Hello, everybody, and welcome to what I consider to be an exciting hour. You've got an incredibly talented person that's going to be speaking here, and I'll start with a couple of quick questions. Like, are you curious about the history of digital color? Do you know how it all came about? Do you know the power of it and what had to be done in order to capture the strength? And do you know from a product management point of view how Moore's law affected computer animation? It's amazing to think of all these things came out of one person. And I want you to sit back and have this opportunity to share time with Alvy Ray Smith. He's sharing his talent, incredible and just magnificent stories today. By the way, he has his undergrad from New Mexico State University in electrical engineering, for all you engineering folks out there, and his PhD from Stanford in computer science. So he's also a person with our own souls as well. In overcoming a whole lot of roadblocks, which he's sometimes willing to share, he's been responsible for fundamental changes in the computer graphic arts and motion picture industries. All you Trekkies will probably remember Wrath of Khan, that's one, and Toy Story from Pixar and multiples after that. The awards and recognitions he has received are numerous, everything from Academy Awards to the Hall of Fame at the Computer History Museum. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He's an elected member of the National Academy of Engineering, and many other recognitions for the fundamental contributions to filmmaking, digital art, and he's just also a fun guy to be around. So without further ado, I turn it over to Alvy. Take it away, kid.
Okay. Hello, everybody. What I'm going to do today is tell you about a book I just finished. I've been working on it for 10 years, called A Biography of the Pixel. It's going to be published by MIT Press. In other words, it's not out yet, but I'm done. My part's done. What is it? This is a book about something that happened 20 years ago that nobody paid much attention to, but I think it was a big, big deal. I call it the Great Digital Convergence. In about 2000, at the millennium, all of the old media types for pictures coalesced into a single medium, the digital pixel. So that's celebrating that event is one purpose of the book. Second purpose is to tell people what pixels are, because an observation of mine is that nobody really knows what they are. Even though we're swimming, each of us is swimming in an ocean of pixels. I have, several million in my pocket. You probably do too, all the time. And yet when I ask people what they are, I get kind of fuzzy answers. And I'm going to tell you what they are in this talk, and you'll see why it's a little difficult for the man on the street or the woman on the street to glibly tell you what the answer is. Okay, I'm going to start in 1780 with this guy. Let's say 1800, just to make it a little bit easier. This is Joseph Fourier. Everything I'm going to talk about, all the science, goes back to this one guy. He came up with the notion. I could spend an hour just talking about him. He's so interesting. But he came up with this first of three great ideas that drive our world. By the way, I call this world the world of digital light, the set of all pictures made of pixels, which is vast. If you think about it, nearly every picture in the world now is digital. And if you think further, nearly every picture that ever existed is digital. That surprised me. Okay, Joseph Fourier came up with the idea that everything is music. Everything's made of waves. And here's one of Fourier's waves. It's that beautiful shape you get if you track, in this case, I'm tracking the tip of the second hand as it goes around the clock versus time to the right. In other words, as a circle unfurls, you get this beautiful shape. Mathematicians call it a sine wave, but I don't have any math in this book. I just call it the wave because it's the only kind of wave we're going to talk about. Here are three more examples of Fourier's waves. They all look alike, except how high they crest and how fast they wiggle. How high they crest is the amplitude, how fast they wiggle is the frequency. You can add those together to get any sound. Here's the word yes. in frequencies. But we're interested in the visual world, which is two-dimensional. But Fourier's idea works there too, except the waves we add together are these. They're corrugations. If you look at the edge of a corrugation, it's the one-dimensional case extruded into the third dimension. You can add those together. Well, first of all, let's zoom. Let's go up above and look down on corrugations, and you see this. This corresponds to the preceding slide with the highest amplitude, lowest frequency at the top, and so forth. Fourier's beautiful idea, and hard to believe, but the math tells us it's so, is that you can add together corrugations to get any visual field. Any. For example, picture your child. This happens to be my child. A lot of years ago, by the way. Check out that Revenge of the Jedi collector's item shirt. And this is the succulent garden behind my house here in Berkeley. If we had a lot of time, I would go through these pictures line by line and show you where all the frequencies are, so you could start thinking of the visual world in terms of frequencies. It's a different way of doing it and lots of fun. But today, let's skip right to the second great idea, the most fundamental idea in the modern digital world, the idea of the sampling theorem. Now, this strange-looking guy his name is Vladimir Kotelnikov. He's a Russian. He was a communist, and he wrote this. He came up with the sampling theorem in 1933 in Russian, and here's a snippet of it. I want you to just record that little figure in the lower left, the hump with the wiggles going off to either side of diminishing height. That's the thing I'm going to call the spreader as we go. This is its first appearance in print, I believe. Now, I took an engineering class, and I was not told about Kotelnikov. I was told that the sampling theorem, by the way, there was no computer science when I was going through school, just to calibrate you. I was taking electrical engineering, and they told us that this guy invented the sampling theorem. Claude Shannon, he's of course a hero in America, but Claude Shannon didn't do it. He came in with the sampling theorem 15 years after Kotelnikov, but more importantly, he never even claimed that he did the sampling theorem. So that's one of the many findings, one of the many historical findings I uncovered while doing this book. Okay, so Kotelnikov is a great, great story. He lived through the entire Soviet nightmare. He was born before the Russian Revolution. He lived through all he lived through the Gulag era, where we learned about the Gulag of prison camps from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. One of the things we learned from Solzhenitsyn also were that there are special islands in the Gulag called Shuraskas, which were for the intelligentsia. If you were building an H-bomb for Mother Russia, you were put in a Shuraska. In other words, you were in prison because they didn't want the idea of leaking away to anybody else. If you were building an ICBM, you were in a Shuraska. Since Kotelnikov was the chief cryptographer for the Soviet, he should have been in a Shuraska, but he wasn't. Why not? Well, because he was protected by a woman, a very powerful woman named Valeria Goroptsova. And the reason she could keep him out of the Shuraska was she was married to Georgy Malenkov. I don't know about you, but I had to learn Soviet history in order to write this book. Malenkov was the guy who helped Stalin run the Soviet early on. And then when Stalin died, he took over, just as bloody as Stalin. This woman protected our guy from going in the Shuraska. The photograph is a picture of a Shuraska called Marfano in northern Moscow. Here's another view, and I have this one here. I show this one because, and here's a modern view, because although Kotelnikov himself didn't go into the Shuraska, his lab did. Everybody in his lab was in this particular Marfano Shuraska. An amazing coincidence is that's the very one that Solzhenitsyn was also in. So, jumping right to the end of his life, let me just tell you one extremely interesting thing about Kotelnikov. He came to America twice. The second visit was in 1956 or 7, when he told us that Russia was going to put up a satellite and it was going to broadcast at this frequency and that frequency, which they proceeded to do 2 months later. He told us they were going to put up Sputnik, and indeed, when it did go up, it broadcast at the 2 frequencies he had told us. Nobody believed him. Here's a picture I have of him. I got from Putin's website. Kotelnikov is wearing all the merit badges of the Soviet Union, the orders of Lenin, the orders of Stalin, the red this, the red that. He's in the Kremlin with Putin, who is knighting him. Only the 4th person to ever be so honored in the Soviet Union. This guy was no slouch. He brought us the sampling theorem. I could go off on that, but I won't. What is it? What is the sampling theorem? Okay. It's this marvelous result that is at the basis of everything we do in pictures. It's at the basis of pixels. Here's a signal, just an arbitrary signal, versus time. No, yeah, let's say this is an amplitude of sound versus time. A straight line is zero loudness. Or you could think of it as the brightness along one line of a picture where the line is zero brightness and the axis is space instead of time. It's a one-dimensional picture is the main thing. Now, it's a continuous signal. What did Fourier tell us? Fourier says, you can represent a continuous signal as a sum of waves. So what Kotelnikov said is, find the wave of highest frequency in the Fourier sum and sample at twice that frequency. So I contend that this wave is the highest frequency in the sum that adds up to the given signal at the top. And the reason I say that is because nothing in that given signal wiggles any faster than this wave. If something did wiggle faster, then there'd have to be a higher frequency wave component. And I put dots along the signal at twice the frequency of that highest frequency wave. And here's where the magic happens. Kotelnikov said, you can throw away everything between the dots and not lose anything. And that's a mind blower if you think about it. It says, it appears to say you can throw away the infinity of information between each 2 dots in the given signal, preserving only the samples, yes, the sampling theorem, and not lose anything. He didn't say it's an approximation. He says it's an equivalence. You can probably see where I'm going. With the 2-dimensional version of this, the signal is a surface, a visual scene, and the samples are what we call pixels. That's the definition of a pixel. A pixel is a sample. All right, we'll come back to that in a minute. The sampling theorem goes the other direction also. It says, okay, given a set of samples, I'm going to do the one-dimensional case here, and then we'll go to 2D. Remember this shape? I showed it to you earlier in that Russian publication. It's the spreader function. We can't actually use the spreader function as given because it's infinite. Those wiggles, although they're getting smaller, go off to infinity in both directions. So we replace it with approximation. And this is a really popular approximation to the spreader, to the ideal spreader. It's got the same hump in it. It's got some negative lobes, but then it goes to 0 exactly, so it's only finite width. So Kotelnikov says, take your spreader and spread each of the samples. That's what I've done here. I've put a copy of the spreader at each sample and adjusted its height so it matched the height of the sample, and then add up the results. That bold line at the top is the original signal back again. It's not exactly the original signal, which is here, because remember I replaced the ideal spreader with an approximate spreader, but it's pretty darn close. In fact, if these are 2 keys, they'll open the same lock. All right, that's the one-dimensional case, but we're interested in pictures. The samples you can think of the set of samples as a bed of nails. And to reconstruct a two-dimensional bed of nails or pixels into the original picture that they represent, you have to spread them with, and I show a picture here of the spreader function generalized to 2 dimensions. If you look at the cross section, you'll see that it's exactly the 1-dimensional spreader. All right, so let's talk about, let me go back. Let's talk about the shape of pixels. Pixels are samples at a point. They have no shape. You can't see a point. The only thing you can see is a spread pixel. And here is what a spread pixel, the shape of a spread pixel is indicated by this shape on the screen right now, if you do it right. My bottom line here is there never has been a little square associated with pixels ever. That's a false representation of pixels. All right, the third great idea is computers and computation. I'm just going to mention that I have a whole chapter on this in the book. It's a beautiful theory, but in order to get through the talk today, I'm going to skip it. But let's pay homage to Alan Turing, Saint Turing, I call him, who invented the whole notion of computation and computers. And computers, that's important. He invented the notion of the stored program computer. I'm emphasizing that because a lot of engineers seem to think it was an engineer who invented that, but no, it was this mathematician. And I detail that in the book. The other important genius who helped bring us computers is this guy right here, Johnny von Neumann. Completely different personality type than Alan Turing, as indicated in this picture of him sitting ass backward on the rim of the Grand Canyon with his 3-piece business suit on. He liked dirty jokes and partying and wearing a lampshade and that kind of thing, but he was one of the few geniuses in the world who knew exactly what Alan Turing had done, and together they went out and helped kickstart the world of computers as we now know it. I'm going to just concentrate. Okay, you'll see several of what I call flow charts in my book, in my slide presentation today. We don't have time to go through the details, but the point is, I found that the history of technology is usually not told correctly. There hardly ever is a single hero from which all things flow. It's a group of people. There's a family. So I think of it as genealogies of technology. Here are the people who made computers happen and how they all interrelated with one another. And you can see there is no straight line through it. It's quite complex. And that's part of my main message. But I am going to concentrate on 2 of these computers. One is Baby, I'll come back to in a moment. And the other one is the Whirlwind. If you look down the thread, the flow below Whirlwind, at the very bottom right of the slide, it says modern computer graphics. That's the flow that's going to take us to where we are today. But let's go back to Baby. This is Baby. I actually visited Baby once I realized Baby was the first computer. This is it, folks. The first computer. Wasn't ENIAC. ENIAC wasn't a computer. It wasn't stored program. Wasn't Colossus, but again, not stored program. It's none of those vacuum tube calculators that people build. It had to be a stored program computer to be stored program in order to be a computer. And this is the guy, Baby. I love it. Just coincidentally was the perfect name. And this is Baby's display. And when I went to visit Baby, this was on the screen, and the word Pixar was scrolling to the right, which means that the first computer had pixels and could animate. That's when I started realizing the history as received is nobody has it right. Pixels go all the way back to the very first computer. Then I quickly found the actual first picture ever made on Baby. That's it. I call it First Light, 1947. Then I found the first interactive game. By the way, Baby was built in Manchester, England. This was Christopher Strachey's checkers program, also in Manchester. And then I found the third interactive game, Tic-Tac-Toe, on EDSAC in Cambridge. So what I'm saying, interactive, very important. The second game, I think I showed these slides in an earlier visit to CMU, Silicon Valley, but I was calling tic-tac-toe the second game. I found the second game, but no pictures of it, unfortunately. All right. Since I spoke last, I found the Whirlwind. Now we're go to Whirlwind. The Whirlwind picture archive, and I had a ball going through this amazing archive of early pictures. By the way, we're in 1950-51 right now, just to calibrate you. Here are some pictures. Here's a first surface I found done with computer graphics. It's not in perspective, but it's a surface. Here's a purported game from 53, maybe. I have some questions about that one. But here's definitely the first animation that was actually done. Baby could animate, but nobody did, apparently. But here is 1951, the Edward R. Murrow show actually had animations from Whirlwind. All right. Okay, this is that last flow chart and a continuation of that last flow chart. Remember, Whirlwind was at the bottom right of that last flow chart. It's at the top of this flow chart, top center. So that's the join. The point being that these are like rivers. They're threads that flow through time, and they interweave in different ways and give us the modern world. Again, it's really hard to find a single hero anywhere. All right, I'm going to talk mostly about three guys in the center, but let me just mention these three guys. Most people have heard of Bezier curves and Kuhn's patch. And I never understood before I did this history how they all fit together, but this is it. And I discovered this guy, Paul de Kesselchow, who actually invented Bezier curves before Bezier, but nobody gave him credit for it because he couldn't publish. That's a separate story. And another side story that I'll not spend time on today are these contributions by the Nazis to the future of digital light. Herb Freeman was rescued by Albert Einstein, and he turned out to be my chairman at NYU in my first job after Stanford. And the guy at the right, Marcelli Wine, was saved by Schindler in Schindler's List. His father was a master tailor and was saved by Schindler. All right, those are all separate stories in the book, but I want to concentrate today on these three guys: Ivan Sutherland, Timothy Johnson, and Lawrence Roberts. Larry Roberts. Here they are. The received version of computer graphics that I got was Ivan Sutherland invented it in 1962 with a program called Sketchpad. It just isn't so. Sketchpad is often described as the first interactive computer graphics. But no, it wasn't. As you recall, I've been showing you interactive programs since 1950 something. What did Ivan and Sketchpad was only 2D. I was shocked when I found out it was only two-dimensional. Sketchpad 3, which doesn't mean version 3, it means the 3D version of Sketchpad, was written by the guy in the middle, whom very few people have ever heard of. His name's Tim Johnson. He's still alive. He's never been honored. Tim Johnson's misfortune is that he looks so much like Ivan Sutherland that every picture on the internet identified as Ivan Sutherland at the controls of Sketchpad are instead of Tim Johnson at the controls of Sketchpad 3. Sketchpad 3 was three-dimensional and interactive, and it was in perspective. Sound familiar? That's really the origins of what we're doing today. I finally figured out that what the first that these guys actually did as far as interaction goes was they were the first to have a computer, TX2 it was called, that was fast enough that they could change the internal model that was being rendered and have the re-rendering happen in real time. In other words, at interactive speeds. So it doesn't roll off the tongue as nicely as the first interactive computer graphics, but it's the first interactively re-rendered computer graphics. It's accurate. The guy on the right, Larry Roberts, is the person who invented the 4x4 matrix and homogeneous coordinate system that we all use to do perspective today. And his idea was incorporated by Tim Johnson in the center. We lost Larry recently, but before I got to talk to him before he died, and I said, are you upset that nobody's ever honored you for this fundamental contribution in computer graphics? He says, well, I got so highly honored for inventing the internet that I haven't ever been upset by being left out by computer graphics. Yes, he was one of the early movers and shakers. So Tim in the middle, Larry on the right brought us what I don't think has ever been actually worded before, and that is what I call the central dogma of computer graphics. We will build models inside our computer memory based on Euclidean geometry, and we will render that, we will project that into 2D using Renaissance perspective. Now, the reason I'm calling this as a dogma is that there is nothing about a computer that requires those two things. And the reason I think it's not ever been articulated before is because it just seems so obvious. But I want to make a huge point that there's nothing about computer graphics or computers that limits us to this symphonic form, I want to call it. Now, as evidenced by all of the movies that have been generated, there's a lot of creativity that can happen inside the central dogma. But I'd like for artists of the world to realize you don't have to be inside the central dogma. All right. So far, I've been talking about Epic One, what I call Epic One of computers. You'll see Baby on the left there, 1948. This is the age of dinosaurs when the computers got bigger as they got more powerful, and they got huge. They got to be the size of rooms and then the size of buildings, and they were pretty stupid, to be honest, in the scheme of things. But then something happened in 1965. I call it Epic 2 began. That's when Gordon Moore announced his what's known as Moore's Law. By the way, just for calibration, I made my first computer graphic in 1965. Moore said Moore's Law like this: the density of chip components, integrated circuit chip components, will double every year and a half. I don't know about you, but that's not very intuitive to me. That's an interesting statistic, but what's it mean? So all I did was just put it in base 10, same law, mathematically equivalent. Everything good about computers gets better by an order of magnitude, that is, by a factor of 10, every 5 years. Now, I use the term order of magnitude because that's the limit of what we humans can conceive. None of us are any good at thinking beyond an order of magnitude. You have to reconceptualize usually to go beyond an order of magnitude. But look at this curve. Starting in 1965, we got an order of magnitude every 5 years. This has been a revolution of unprecedented size. It's the dynamo, the supernova explosion that I've ridden my entire life, and so have you, and so will you. Where are we now? Oops, wrong button. We're at a Moore's Law factor of 100 billion. That means computers today are 100 billion times better in every way than they were in 1965 when I made my first computer graphic. You can't think that. You just have to live it. So we know that just 5 years from now, that factor is going to reach 1 trillion. But I challenge you to figure out what that means. If you can probably become a billionaire. It's really hard to think of. And by the way, it's hard if you haven't been there to think backwards in order of magnitude. I bet most of you can't think of any clue of how hard it was for us back down that curve at 1x, 1000x, and so forth. It was tough, but there's no reason you should. All right. In terms of my story today, what did Moore's Law bring us? It brought us color. There were no color pixels until Moore's Law came along and boosted the power of computers astonishingly. And this is it. These are the first color pixels. You're looking at them. I found them as part of my search for pixels. They were on. I found the two engineers who did this living in Salt Lake City. They're in their late 80s. They were thrilled that I found them. We talked for 7 hours and we nailed the point when it actually happened. they built a simulator for the Apollo moon project. And this picture is of the lunar module rendered in color pixels off of their simulator, which cost millions of dollars. And nobody knows about it because it was not public, right? It was in some NASA facility somewhere, used only by astronauts, I guess. And there were no journals to publish it in. You can find them, but they're really thick, almost unreadable GE, NASA tech memos. I found them. All right. 1967, by the way, is when this happened, the Summer of Love. Okay. As you know, you may notice that these flowcharts are getting more and more complex too, because orders of magnitude more are being stuffed in every one. To cut through this one, let's just start with these three guys. Rod Rougelot and Bob Schumacher are the two engineers who brought us the first color pixels. Don Greenberg, who's another mover and shaker in computer graphics, and this is one of I love this story when I uncovered it, was Don Greenberg and Rod Rougelot shared a tent as freshmen during freshman orientation at Cornell University, way back when. And then Rod Rougelot and Bob Schumacher built a machine called Non-RT. It's the non-real-time version of the Apollo simulator. And they invited their old buddy Don Greenberg at Cornell to bring up some students and use that machine. So this is where the Cornell version of the world of computer graphics comes in. Most people know the Utah version, that's the Xerox version. There's the Utah version. Then that's where the Cornell version comes in. I'm not going to spend time on that. I'm going to talk about very briefly Xerox, Utah, and the coming together at New York Tech, Lucasfilm, and Pixar. I happen to know that pretty well. But I'm also going to mention, if I can, right at the very end, how those same threads rebraided into DreamWorks and Blue Sky. And at the very bottom of the chart, you can see Toy Story, Ants, and Ice Age, the three movies that signified the great digital convergence had happened. Okay, let's go. This 1972, on the right is a movie, the first color movie made by Don Greenberg and his students from Cornell on the machine built by those two engineers who brought us the first color pixels. So the other two, let's see, one on the left is a hand by Ed Catmull, the guy who co-founded Pixar with me. And then in the middle is Fred Park, his classmate. Both of them were from University of Utah, and they actually did animations, they claim, in 1971, but no, I couldn't find any pictures of those. These went public in 1972, these two black and white, the hand and the face, and were incorporated in the 1986 movie Future World as props. My first encounter with color pixels was at Xerox PARC, the famous Xerox PARC. My buddy Dick Schaup built the first frame buffer, the first actual public access memory that you could make color pictures with. And I went crazy. It changed my life, obviously. And Pixar basically comes from this encounter. I thought until I did this book that we had the first color pixels there in 1973, 74, but we didn't. Those two guys in 67 had done it. My first formal contribution to computer graphics was the HSP color transform shown at the top. Dick Schaup, who did Super Paint, name of that program, also showed the first completely anti-alias geometry, 1973, at Xerox PARC. Okay, with that, it was possible to finally do the great digital convergence. All right, now I'm leaping ahead really fast. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. This is about New York Tech, where I went after Xerox PARC fired me because they decided not to do color. The guy on the left is Alexander Desaversky. He's a Russian aristocrat who got kicked out of Russia in the revolution, came to America, got wealthy by building Republic aircraft. The guy on the right is Alexander Schur, Alex Schur, Uncle Alex, we called him. And the two of them somehow met, I never was able to figure that out, and established New York Institute of Technology. The guy on the left wrote a book just after Pearl Harbor called Victory Through Air Power. Walt Disney turned it into a propaganda movie starring Dee Seversky himself. And I think since these two Alexanders, Dee Seversky and Schur, were friends, somehow that association with Disney, the Disney family actually stayed with Dee Seversky on Long Island, is what caused Alex Schur, the guy on the right, to think he was the next Disney. And he started doing cell animated movie called Tubby the Tuba. And that's where, let me show you the buildings on this. So basically, these guys cobbled together mansions on the North Shore of Long Island and the estates. And the mansions on those estates are the buildings on the campus of New York Tech. And the mansion at the lower right is called the Dee Seversky Mansion in honor of Alexander Dee Seversky. The building at the top is where the group now known as Pixar first came together. We started in a garage too, 4-car garage. So all of a sudden, the world changed. The word leaked out about this crazy place on Long Island. Ed Catmull and Malcolm Blanchard on the left found their way from University of Utah to New York Tech. David DeFrancisco with his motorbike and myself with my, you see I'm returning to the long hair that I had then, joined because we had an NEA grant and we needed access to a frame buffer, and this guy had one. And that's the beginnings. So this wealthy man on Long Island, before long, bought us the first 24-bit frame buffer, the first pixels with 24 bits. Ed and I invented the alpha channel, and we all went nuts there making pictures as fast as we could, making art. So we just made art, thousands of pieces. Meanwhile, Ed wrote a program called Tween because he's supposed to be helping these animators do Tubby the Tuba. And it didn't work. We found out it was just too hard for these animators. In fact, it was too hard for us. 2D animation turns out to be harder than 3D animation. It was quite a bit of learning there. One of the most important things that happened to me was artist Ed Imschweller showed up, and we made a piece called Sunstone together. That's me on the left with dark hair. And here's one frame out of Sunstone. Now, we couldn't do 3D yet, right? The computers are too slow. We could do little bits and pieces. So this is a frame of actual 3D. I wrote a program called Texas, Texture Applying System. All it could handle were flats, simple rectangles with texture maps, but in perspective in 3D and anti-aliased and all that. I'm very proud of this piece. It's in the Museum of Modern Art collection. All right, I'm leaping again another 5 years to, I should say, we quickly figured out that Alex Schur didn't have what it takes to make a movie. We had the notion to make the movie at New York Tech, but he just didn't have it. So we leapt when George Lucas beckoned us to Marin County. And before long, I figured out that George didn't know anything about how to use us either. But Star Trek II showed up, and we got that famous Genesis demo in Star Trek II. And that was our first piece. I directed it. That was our first appearance on the big screen of the group that would become Pixar. Tron was being done at about the same time by Magi and Disney. Then Ed and I, coming back from the 1983 SIGGRAPH, said, at the 1984 SIGGRAPH, let's announce to the world that we do character animation, not space operas, not special effects. We do character animation. And I started right then drawing the storyboard for Andre and Wally B. Luckily, we hired John Lasseter. I thought I was going to be the animator. Turns out I'm not good enough at it. But luckily, I hired John Lasseter, who was good at it. And so that saved the piece artistically. This is 4 successive frames, by the way, out of Andre and Wally B. Technically, we solved the key remaining technical problem that we had to solve, motion blur. If you don't do motion blur in animation, you get this juddering, unpleasant effect. So we solved that. We showed it off with Andre and Wally B. And about the same time, genius Tom Porter in my group made this piece, 1984, where it was, in fact, you can see it up here on the wall behind me. It showed the world that we had mastered all of the technology, all the technology that we needed to be really serious. And at this point, I realized the central dogma has to be extended. It's not only Euclidean geometry and Renaissance perspective, but we're using Newtonian physics. Again, it's a dogma because there's nothing about computers that forces the use of Newtonian physics. And the next leap, I'm leaving out the whole awful first few years of Pixar, and I started Pixar. Disney finally showed it. Moore's Law finally got to the place where computing a movie was feasible, and we did Toy Story. So I'm going to end with just 2 more slides. The same, I showed you earlier how the same threads came together to form PDI DreamWorks, and they came out with Ants in 1998. Toy Story came out in 95. Ants came out in 98, second movie. Ice Age was the threading into Magi, Blue Sky, and they came out in 2002. So right at the millennium, plus or minus, these 3 flags were waving mightily that the great digital convergence had arrived. And that's more or less the end of my book. But of course, you have to look at the future a little bit. I have since, as several of you know, joined as an advisor the little company Baobab Studios in the Valley, which just keeps producing these amazing virtual reality successes. I'm not going to talk about that, but that's what I've been doing with myself, keep my hands in the entrepreneurial pie. That's my talk.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Alvy. And it's good to see you.
Hi, Lake.
Hi. For first of all, I would really want to thank you for taking time to share this amazing story with our students. And I'm also very excited to hear that your book we're about to read your book. So for those who don't know, that Alvy has been spending about 2 to 3 years now, right? Writing
10.
this book. 10. Okay.
10 years.
All right, my bad.
I'm ready to finish.
All right. So I met Alvy about maybe five years ago.
Yeah.
And then we both work on Baobab, which is an amazing company. And I just want to say that we really appreciated that how much Alvy has been spending time with CMU students. Since we know each other 5 years ago, Alvy has been giving talk every year to our Silicon Valley campus and share the amazing story of computer graphics history and also the amazing story of Pixar. So I just want to represent our faculty and students, show our gratitude to you. All right.
Thanks.
All right. So with that, Lauren, I know you have a few questions from the students. So let's get going.
Thank you, Lake. Yes, absolutely. Just to echo that, thank you so much. And it's just it's fascinating just to hear you speak about the history. And there's so many questions that came in that I'm trying to decide on which would be the best ask. So there were maybe 70 plus questions submitted. So for you all who we can't ask the question, I'm going to try to generalize as much as possible the questions that I think people are most curious about. So first question that came through is just wanting to make sure that people know when they can buy your book and where, and make sure they know the title.
Okay, the book is called A Biography of the Pixel, and it'll be published eventually by MIT Press. It's in the works now. Now, they told me it'd be out in the spring, but I went out to the MIT Press site a couple days ago and it said August. So I hope it's not that far out, but it might be. It's not available yet, in other words. I could answer almost every one of your questions by saying read the book, but
well, maybe. So
actual words will have to suffice today.
So sometime in 2021, we will be able to read your book. And a lot of the questions that came through, Alvy, were wanting to know a lot about your personal journey. So we had a chance to hear about milestones and the history of computer graphics and your role in it, as well as others. People are also just kind of curious what inspired you. So there was a lot of questions submitted about why Pixar. You could have gone many different directions, and all the companies you founded, really, you could have gone many different directions in your career. So what was it that inspired you along the way to make these left or right turns that you pursued in various directions that we.
I guess I should start by saying, we didn't plan on Pixar. That just sort of happened because we had to do something in there to keep our group together. But the group really started on Long Island at that crazy man's place. I guess I didn't emphasize how crazy he was. One of his slogans was, "Our goal is to speed up time, eventually deleting it." And we go, what? But that's the way he talked. Okay. In fact, I thought about calling my book "The Deletion of Time." The goal, is I guess I should make it clear that we weren't businessmen. We did not set out to start a business, successful business. We set out to make a movie. I wanted to make art. I grew up oil painting and with painting with oils and acrylics. My uncle in New Mexico taught me how when I was a little kid. And I've always loved art, and I was good at technology. And I finally found that paint program at Xerox PARC where I could do both. I could program and make art pictures. So I was in heaven. And I got fired there, so I had to find the next place. The next place turned out to be this guy on Long Island. Boom, it just sort of came. All of a sudden, people started showing up that had the same interest as I did. Slightly different, everybody's slightly different, but we all wanted to make pictures. And then it kind of, we sort of watched the old time animators, how hard it was, what they did. Cell animation is a tough process. And we said, you know what? Let's be the first group in the world to make a movie. Only on computers, usually only computers. Not even drawing, just only on computers. Truthfully, we had no idea it was going to take 20 years to implement that dream. But we had the vision. It was really clear. We could state it clearly and keep it in mind. So getting a clear vision, I guess, it's very important to have a clear vision, easily articulated. We had it. Make the first movie. And, we stumbled quite a few times along the way. We figured out that this guy, Tubby the Two-Bit, was awful, by the way, and we were so happy we had nothing to do with it. But we realized this guy hasn't got what it takes to produce a movie. So about then, George Lucas said, "Come back to California." We go, "Oh boy, okay, he knows how to make movies." We get to Lucasfilm, and it turns out George didn't know what he had hired. He thought we were just a bunch of technoids that built hardware and wrote software. And we went, "No, we want to make content." And we had to take the job. I had to accept the job with Paramount Pictures, not Lucasfilm, to make Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, the Genesis demo. And we made it as a 60-second commercial to George Lucas so that he would know what he himself had. People who were really good at making pictures. And he got it, sort of. The most important thing that George did was he told his buddy Steven Spielberg about us. And Spielberg got it, had us in Young Sherlock Holmes, and boom, then the word started spreading. But then George and Marcia got divorced, and boom, George no longer had any money. All this time, we're just a research group, right? We were just a bunch of nerds making pictures. Neither Ed and I knew anything about running a company, but all of a sudden, overnight, George didn't have enough money to support us. And we had a group of 40 by then. And I went to Ed and I said, "Ed, let's start a company. It'd be a sin," is the word I used, "for this group to disperse." And we went across the street in Marin County and bought How to Start Company books, which blows me away now that that actually worked, because we didn't know what we were doing. Then we had to finance it. We went through 45 financing possibilities, and everybody said no. We almost got General Motors, but even that one blew apart. And finally, as everybody knows, we finally landed Steve Jobs, which, even though Steve and I had a horrible time together, he did provide the money when 45 other outfits said no. So there you go. And we finally made it. Disney pulled out. Disney finally came through at the very end. Ed and I used to go to Disney every year and say, "When are you guys going to do this?" And they would always come up with some reason why they couldn't. But in the long run, they finally stepped forward when Moore's Law reached the magic place and said, "Okay, boys, let's do that group." let's do that movie you've always wanted to make. That was Toy Story. I'm sure I'm not answering anybody's questions, but.
Well, you actually answered a lot of the questions by just hearing your narrative of your story. And I mean, one of the things you're talking about is this vision that you had for yourself for 20 years. And there's a lot of questions that were submitted around just advice for students who have things that they're really passionate about or their vision. And what advice do you have? And also, how did you stick to that vision despite the stumbling blocks that you were describing? And how did you just kind of stay the course? I imagine it was really hard to do that at times. And what would you advise for students who are maybe facing something similar in their future?
Well, I guess the only really hard part was that when we started Pixar without enough horsepower to make pictures, and we had to build hardware for 5 years, and we weren't a hardware company. We didn't know how to do that, but we were just struggling to keep ourselves alive. But the rest of the time, we were making pictures and showing off to artists, and we were having a great time. Everything we did for decades was a first. And there's a certain thrill to that where you're just the first. And then everybody knows you're the best. And it's, and the team was, I can't overemphasize how fun it was. My colleagues are all geniuses. And they, I remember during the Lucasfilm period, where I was head of computer graphics, these geniuses like Tom Porter, Lauren Carpenter, and Rob Cook would come running into my office like 3 or 4 times a day, like I was daddy. I was just barely older than they. And they would say, look what I did today. And it was some mind-blowing solution like motion blur that they had just solved. You can't, it's like the best of universities, but it's in the service of making art and movies. It's sort of the best of all possible worlds. It's only that darn money thing that kind of gets in the way. What kept us going? It was just.
All right, I know. So I know we're running out of time. So I'm sure that we still have more than 70 questions for you, Alvy. But given the time constraints, so we have to close right now. So. Okay. Can you give us a closing statement and that, what do you want the students to, for today's takeaway and then one piece of advice for them, life advice?
Okay. Figure out what it is that you're really good at. I thought I was going to be a great animator. No, I wasn't a great animator. And it took me quite a while to figure that out. And animators have a skill that I just don't have. I can make things move, but I can't convince you that they're conscious. There are lots of jobs. If you want to be in the movie business, there are lots of jobs that require high skill that aren't animator, so you have to figure out what it is. The other piece of advice, and this one's hard to follow if you have a family, is go where the action is. I didn't have a family until I was 40, and so it was easy for me to jump from one side of the country to the other several times, which I did. But I put off the wonderful thrill of having a family for a long time to make that happen. And this thing about passion, I think that's tied together with what you're really good at. If I don't actually use the word because it's just so intrinsic to when you're doing what you're good at. You don't even need the word passion. It's just, you're just happy.
Doesn't feel like it's work.
No, and it doesn't feel like you have need a special emotion to drive it. It just is, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alvy. And then we're all looking forward to read your book. So when you're ready, send me a link so I can share with the students.
I sure want it to be out there too. Thanks a lot.